Did you ever have the feeling you was being watched?
Is it science or is it fiction?
I have a bad feeling about this.
Can you trust it?
Don't you know by now? A mother always knows what's best.
It's a mother's intuition.
What does it mean?
I got a bad feeling about this.
It really all depends on your definition of intuition. Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Mind the Gap podcast, bridging the gap between your minds and everything else. I'm Keegan Gwydolin.
And I'm Mackie Drew.
And our show today is called I've Got a Bad Feeling About This. And this is our show about intuition.
All right, well, what is intuition, Keegan?
Essentially, intuition is the ability to acquire knowledge without using inference or reason based on, your senses. So it's often considered an inner perception that allows you to gain true understanding. In other words, information is coming from within rather than from the environment around you.
Yeah, you like the cops got a bad feeling about this, so
Yeah.
Or you got a gut feeling.
Yeah.
Feeling in my gut, this guy's guilty, I got him.
Right, and that's kind of what we mean from a scientific standpoint. That intuition may consist of the ability to know valid solutions to problems quickly and without having to compare options. Basically like a gut reaction or a gut decision.
Yeah. Or when you're doing math and you've like practiced a certain type of problem for a while, and then suddenly like you could just look at like the questions parameters and you're like, I got this, done.
Right. And that's something called the recognition primed decision making model. And that shows that under pressure, when faced with decision making, experts use their experience to intuitively identify similar situations and choose a solution. This recognition primed decision making is also been associated with right brain activity. And obviously the accuracy of this form of intuition in this context depends on past knowledge and experience in a particular area, right? So you're not going to have reliable intuition in areas that you have no experience in, right? It's all based on what you've encountered before.
I'm going to know I'm going to know maybe a little bit more about math, and then somebody else will know intuitively what, like, somebody comes to you like, oh, my lawnmower is not working.
Right.
And then they know what's up.
Yeah. And I also hear this a lot with physicians, is when they're making diagnoses, they will say, oh, yeah, it's less of a gut decision or like a gut reaction and more of a like, oh, I identify. I've seen this presentation before. I know what the diagnosis is. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
So it's definitely not gut decision making. I'm not saying that your doctor just makes his diagnoses or her diagnoses based on gut reactions, but it's based on your clinical expertise, right? It's based on what you've seen before.
It kind of seems like there's really like two divergent definitions for intuition. There's the one where you're gathering knowledge from some sort of like spiritual realm, right? Like a god or something, and it's saying, oh, this is the true answer.
Right.
And then there's the one where you're based on experience, and your experience is giving you maybe a higher probability of being accurate.
Mm-hmm. Intuition can also refer to the ability to perceive the thoughts and feelings of another person, which is called empathic accuracy, but I'll leave that to you, Mackie. I think you talk about it later.
Yes. I'm going to be talking about that later for sure, yeah.
And the other thing is that, as you said, intuition also is discussed in spirituality as a way to have truth revealed without the use of logical reasoning, like you were mentioning. And it's often asserted that not only is this intuition valid, but it is above reason. It's more reliable because you heard it from some divine or spiritual source.
Yeah, not only can I not tell you how I know this, but you can't tell me I'm wrong. That's
Exactly.
the whole idea there. Anyway, I thought I would talk about a little bit about the accuracy of intuition. And I looked heavily for studies related to how accurate intuition tends to be generally, and it was not very fruitful. I found, I think, the best you can here, but it's really not great. A lot of it was about criminal law, and I'm going to talk about that in more in depth later. But a lot of these studies are not either very big or very, very well studied yet. One that is, though, is the Dunning-Kruger effect, which was coined by a study done by Dunning and Kruger. And this states basically that an incompetent person will tend to overestimate their own level of skill, fail to recognize genuine skill in others, fail to recognize the extremity of their inadequacy, and recognize and acknowledge their own previous lack of skill if they are exposed to training on that skill. And this was later developed upon, and it was found that the opposite is true as well. So basically what it boils down to is that a person who thinks they're really good at something is more likely, not necessarily, but more likely to think that they're actually good at it. And if they're good at it, they're more likely to think that they're bad at it.
Yeah,
And
it's one of those cases of you know what you don't know, and you
know
how good other people are.
Yeah, like, you know, you can say, oh, well, look, I can play the piano so nicely, but then you realize you see somebody else play and you're like, well, crap.
Yeah.
But you're not really going to see those other really good players until you're actually, like, steeped in the culture of pianohood, right?
Pianohood. It's a
Pianohood.
brotherhood, you fool.
It's
the
a
brotherhood of the piano.
Yeah, the black and white key brotherhood.
Yes, exactly.
Your flags are easily expressed on black and white televisions. But yeah, the people who tended to, on average, score in the 12th percentile, they always estimated themselves, or on average, they estimated themselves to be in the 62nd. So you've got a huge effect there for.
Yes, very, very different.
Yeah, this was actually studied in humor, grammar, and logic. They assume it goes to other categories, and there's been smaller studies since that have shown that. So I think that's really the key failing in intuition, where you think you're good, so therefore, at least in the experiential type of intuition that we're talking about.
Right.
The Innocence Project is an organization that sort of goes back in time and tries to find old cases that didn't really they weren't quite solved properly. They look for ones that looked fishy, and they bring in DNA and for real good forensics that you see nowadays to try to like reopen the case and prove that people are innocent, and they do all the time. Because, you know, it's only been fairly recently that DNA has actually been permissible in court. So you have a lot of this backlog of people who aren't really, who maybe weren't trialed as fairly as they should have been. But they actually, they report that in 75% of cases where people are wrongly convicted, it has to do with specifically bad eyewitness testimony. So the idea that people know or that they saw something, therefore it happened, it's not really the case, right? People assume that just because you saw something, you actually have a good understanding of that. And that sort of shows a failing of our senses. But also it comes into intuition in that people were much more confident. Like when they actually studied jurors, people were way more confident than they should have been in eyewitness testimony. 87% of people... people tended to give 87% of the time give people more credit than they're due. So if they were making up a story versus actually telling the truth, people weren't really good at parsing that. They couldn't really tell that they were lying or how accurate the story was.
Which
and
is key if you're a juror evaluating an eyewitness testimony.
Exactly. That's all you're for, right? You're there to make decisions on the evidence to see if they're true or false. And the one thing they have to do is they're failing at. But people are far more likely to trust an eyewitness account, even if it's false, than say a piece of scientific data. So you have sort of human factor there.
Yeah, it must be our trusting of a human versus a machine.
Yeah, it's Terminator's fault, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, more on empathic accuracy, which is basically the idea of how well a person can infer the thoughts and feelings of another person accurately. And there's been some good data on this. First off, get the myth out there right away. A lot of people think that women tend to be much better at men at this, that there's some sort of mechanism by which women can better tell how people are feeling or how they're thinking. But that doesn't really seem to be the case epidemiologically. And when it's studied in the lab, you can find cases where women do tend to do better than men, but only when they're first primed with that expectation. So women are told, oh, women tend to do better at telling how people are feeling. And then they try it, and then they do better.
Mm-hmm. They're expected to, right? It's like a social expectation.
Exactly. But if they're not expected to, if they're not primed for that, they do just as well as men. And interestingly, though, it doesn't work the same in reverse for men. So they don't have, if you prime men, saying men are better generally at this, then it doesn't happen. Men don't perform better than women. And I think that's probably due to like a deeper social expectation. Like they don't believe the researchers, maybe?
Yeah.
A thought? I don't know.
It might be interesting if they asked the men if they believe them or something. Somehow evaluated that.
Yeah, they definitely did not in this study. So that's a shame. What a fail on their part.
Epic fail.
Yeah, I guess they couldn't quite. They didn't have the intuition to think about that. I'm sorry. So it's actually been found that people with higher oxytocin levels actually have higher empathic accuracy. So I think that's interesting because oxytocin is actually a hormone in your brain that's used for pair bonding. So it's, I believe, just for women, though. So
the major pair bonding hormone in men is vasopressin.
Ah, okay. So it does actually still have an effect in men, then?
Yeah, for sure. You see both hormones in both sexes.
Okay, so yeah, so oxytocin is used in pair bonding. So the thought is that that this oxytocin is actually not improving people's ability to like parse somebody's feelings, but more so it's making them care more about the social interaction. So they're actually paying closer attention to cues, and that gives them sort of an edge on their competitors. They've actually looked into sort of an epidemiological look at how people do with empathic accuracy, and it seems like people who are violent with their partners, men or women, tend to do much worse than their counterparts. So they seem to think that all the time that the person that they're being violent with feels bad about something that they did. So it's almost like they feel like they're being guilt tripped or something. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that is so that's maybe that's like blocking their ability to, or maybe there is some sort of like underlying physiological difference.
Maybe
we don't really know.
Defect in oxytocin.
That would actually make a lot of sense.
Improper pair bonding or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, what I'd like to talk about now is the first thing that struck me when we were coming up with topics for this show. And that is the feeling like you're being watched. And I feel like a lot of people have experienced this. You typically experience it in a crowded area, so like in the mall or in class in like a crowded lecture hall or something like that. It's also known as the psychic staring effect or scopisthesia. And it's basically when people feel like they're being watched, and they feel like they know this through some sort of extrasensory perception. Have you've experienced this before or heard of it? Or
yeah, I've experienced this. I mean, I don't know though. Like, I don't know when I differentiate in my head between just seeing somebody in the corner of my eye watching me. Like I went to dinner last night and I had that. Some guy was staring at me from across the room, and I could definitely see him looking at me. But it was like definitely just in the corner of my eye. So it wasn't like I had any sort of special sense about it, right?
Right. It wasn't an intuitive sense. It was.
Yeah, I was
looking see that guy
him.
staring at me.
Yeah.
Yeah. This was first researched by a man named Edward Titchener in 1898. He was a psychologist and a professor, And he had a bunch of his students claiming that they could feel when they were being stared at from behind.
Those dumb students.
Yeah, and others, on top of that, thought that they could make someone turn around by staring at the back of their neck. They described the feeling of being watched as, quote, a state of unpleasant tingling which gathers in volume and intensity until a movement which shall relieve it becomes inevitable, end quote.
That is a great and colorful description. That is some nice language.
They always had them in like the late 1800s, early 1900s.
They always sounded like they were writing a poem.
Yeah.
All right.
Overly descriptive. So, like a good scientist, he conducted some experiments, got some people to stare at other people's necks. The people staring at necks could not make other people turn around. And the people whose necks were being stared at did not often turn around. He basically found nothing but negative results. All right, so his hypothesis for explaining this phenomena was that when someone felt like they were being watched, they turned around. And the act of turning around would actually catch the attention of someone who is already sort of looking in that general direction, and they had that person in their field of vision. And when the person turns around, it causes the other person to like look at them, which gives the illusion that they'd been staring at them the whole time. But in reality, they just looked over because the person moved.
I do that all the time. That is so awkward. I've been on both the sending and receiving end of that weird bus-wise confrontation, and it feels so awkward all the time. And it's like, you just want to yell, I wasn't staring at you, you looked at me. And then, yeah, like you just want to convince them. And then when they do...
you know what they're feeling, right?
And then when they do look at you, you think that they were staring. And I definitely am like, why was that guy staring at me? So I'm both guilty and innocent, I assure you.
And the other thing is that, at least in my mind, if you're actually staring at someone, if they look over, you're not going to continue staring. You're going to look away, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like you won't typically catch the person staring, right?
Yeah. So you're missing all the hits and you're hitting all the misses.
Yeah. It's like reverse Battleship. The feeling of having like that tingling in the back of your neck, he explained that feeling as sort of a positive feedback loop where you think about like that idea that someone might be staring at you, pops into your head. Mm-hmm. And then you think about your neck, and that causes you to feel it more, and you continue thinking about it more, and it causes you to feel it more, right? And it amplifies itself until you eventually turn and look. And you catch someone looking, and you're like, I knew it.
It's almost like a cute OCD.
Exactly. So that's how he explained the phenomena, and people who have looked at this over the years have agreed with his conclusion. It's kind of nice that he was like the first person to look into it, and he wrapped it up quite nicely.
Yeah, that's an extremely uncommon case.
Yeah, but
just like, oh, I did all these studies really well, and nothing came up, and then here are all the reasons why it didn't work. Congratulations.
Yeah, exactly, and he provided an alternate mechanism.
Yeah.
Another study, however, by John Coover in 1913, he asked 10 subjects to state whether they could sense an experimenter looking at them over a period of 100 possible staring periods each.
Staring periods, great.
Yeah, so it's like, I guess every 10 seconds he would ask them, right? And they were right 50.2% of the time, which he described as, quote, an astonishing approximation of pure chance.
There's that poeticism again.
Yeah.
But that is
50% would be you just guessing, right?
Yeah. No, that's really, really close to 50%, especially for 100 possible staring periods. Mm-hmm. That's really good. That's really close.
Times 10 people, right? So it's 1,000.
Oh, true enough. All right, that's fair.
And there have been numerous studies over the years that confirm these findings. So people have looked into it. There's a guy who still does these studies. He's a parapsychologist.
Oh,
and
wait, parapsychologists. I thought those went away in the 70s.
Yeah, you would hope, right? No.
I guess they're just not funded anymore.
Yeah, I don't know how he funds his studies, but he keeps running these studies, and they always keep turning up negative results. And he tries to, like, tweeze out some little thing out of the data, and it never comes out, so...
Okay, well, yeah, that's I guess people's failing in their ability to actually observe the universe, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. People mostly trust anecdotes. They trust their own ability to know what's happening, and they trust their ability to figure out patterns in noise. Oh, my friend had Diet Coke, and now they have MS. Therefore,
aspartame.
Yeah, exactly. So you see that all the time. People trusting anecdotes. Oh, this natural product worked for me, and therefore it works all the time for everything. But yeah, I think that the biggest cause for all this is cognitive biases, and basically what those are is a tendency to think in a certain way that can lead to problems, known problems in thinking. You'll see a couple examples in a second, but I just wanted to first say that the books I use to reference all this stuff is "You Are Not So Smart and You Are Now Less Dumb" by David McCraney. Very good books. I would highly recommend them to any of our listeners, especially if you're interested in the things here. But don't read too much into it, because you'll start to feel terrible about yourself. It's You realize just how bad you are at actually figuring out what's happening around you, and there's hundreds of these cognitive biases, and I'm just going to cover a couple today because there's a lot of information on each of them. But probably the most common example of cognitive bias is confirmation bias, which is basically the idea that you're going to count you're only going to count the hits, and you're going to forget about all the misses, and it's kind of the way that psychics work, right? They come out with
pretend to work.
Well, they work in a way. They do what they intend to do. They make money. So the idea is they'll come up with like 20 really specific predictions, and of course most of them are going to be wrong. You get the one really close prediction, and you're like, how did that happen? And it's so close.
You must be really psychic.
Exactly. So they've got they've gotten it wrong most of the time, but you're going to forget about those misses. Mm-hmm. For any number of reasons. It's mostly though because you have an expectation. You've gone to a psychic for a reason, because you want it to work. And you're confirming that. That's why it's called confirmation bias.
It's also, I think, what happens partly, at least, in horoscopes.
Oh, for sure, yeah. The people, especially with these very vague statements, right? They're looking for the accuracy in the statements.
Right.
And it happens constantly too. I constantly see people talking about how this is such a terrible time in history. There's all this crime and war, and it's really actually, statistically, the least amount of war currently.
Yeah, things have just been going up for ages.
Yeah, since we've started recording history, we have the least war now than we have ever had. And the same is for the case for crime, which is kind of harder to study, but as far as we can tell, we got the least amount of crime now. So, I mean, people constantly see all these things on TV. Oh, there was a murder today, and there's a murder today, and blah, blah, blah. So many, they hear this every day, all day, and they forget about all those times that people weren't murdered. It's kind of funny to say. It's not very
good news. 7 billion people were not murdered today.
I wouldn't be opposed to them starting that.
Reverse news.
Yeah. All these things that didn't happen. Hooray. There's actually been some good studies on this. It's actually been shown that investors in the stock market who resist their own bias tend to make more money than those who don't.
I like that. I like rewarding good logic.
Yeah, it's so direct too. There's no middleman, no researcher giving you treats if you do something right. But yeah, in medicine, though, that's probably the reason they were using all these old practices, right? Like leeching and bloodletting and all these terrible things for so many years, because it works one time, and then you're like, oh, he got better after I treated him. I forgot about all those other people who died. you know,
Of course. And not only medicine, but also alternative medicine.
Yeah. Like you see people taking things for their colds, whatever newfangled thing
Cold
they've come
effects
up with.
is a big one.
Yeah, cold effects. I'm sure there's a million things. I bet you could name any substance, and I bet it's a remedy. Like extract
Someone
of pillow.
thinks it's a remedy.
Yeah, exactly. So you and people will take this, and then they'll get better like they would have anyway.
Yeah.
But you don't know whether or not you actually got better because of that or whatnot, you know? And you see that all the time with like especially alternative modalities like chiropractors and whatnot, where they can help they get better, and maybe they do treat your non-complicated acute lower back pain, the only thing they've been found to be able to treat, and then you forget about all those times they hurt your back when you went.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and I think this is also related to how placebo or anecdotes work, right? This is how anecdotes are so effective, because it's a confirmation thing. It's like, oh, you're only presenting the confirmation of this idea, right?
Yeah. And you know what?
They don't tell you stories about all the times it didn't work.
You know,
They
one
tell
thing
you about the time it worked.
I was thinking about this just in context of online reviews. More often than not, you see a lot of negative reviews, because the only people who care are the ones who have, you know, a negative expectation. Maybe not confirmation bias, but it's a similar effect.
Yeah. I've always observed that as well. I'm like, well, if I enjoy the experience, I'm going to go home and chill out. If I am pissed off and it's bothering me, then I'm going to want to vent it out on a review or something.
Exactly. So in politics, it turns out that after a 2-decade study of political pundits by Philip E. Tetlock, he found that on a whole, their predictions were no better than chance. And he blames this on their ability to take in new information. Like we talked about before, if you're an expert in something, you should get better.
Yeah.
But their inability to take in new information, because they're just trying to confirm what they already know, is hindering their ability to get better. And really, they're just not
self-defeating.
Very good. Yeah, and you see this all the time. I mean, you don't closely follow politics, and I do on and off, but you see people who've made predictions, and then they'll live off of that one prediction for the rest of their life. They'll say, I got this right exactly. And then, and then they'll have 100 other things they got wrong. But they'll always bring that up.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about hindsight bias as well as my third cognitive bias. Again, there's hundreds of these, so just keep in mind, these are just some of your failings.
Oh, don't worry, you've got many more.
You've got way more problems than just this. With hindsight bias, it's also known as the knew-it-all-along effect. And this is the inclination to see events that have already occurred as being more predictable than they were before they took place. So you're saying, so something happens, and it may be very unlikely, and you'd be like, oh, I knew that would happen. But yeah, it's a fun study I found. People were actually studied by being primed with 2 different fake research results, and then they would actually, even if they were given these results, like just seconds, or not seconds, but minutes apart. So like you've got, say 2 minutes apart. And even though these research results contradict each other, they will accept both as obvious. So for instance, one case from the study was, studies have shown older people tend to do better in college than younger people because of their life experience. And then they would say another 2 minutes later, studies have shown younger people tend to do better in college than older people because you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And they'll accept both of those as true, even though they'll have both not just true, but obvious. And
even though they both directly contradict each other.
Yeah. And they'll agree to both. They'll claim that they knew that all along. Uh-huh. And they actually, when they were asked later if they thought those studies that they thought were real at the time were a good use of research money, they will tend to claim that it was not a good use because the conclusion was obvious.
Oh, that's terrible.
Even though they contradicted each other. So obviously, even self-contained, that couldn't be obvious because they accepted both contrary views. And that is terrible because, you know, there's some influence of society on how science money is used, and if they aren't understanding why, like a snail, for instance, like we're studying snails' mating habits and it leads to a cure for cancer, just like things like that can happen.
Of course it came from snails. That was
of course,
obvious.
all along. But like, yeah, and that's what they'll say. and if they can't parse this sort of, this idea that maybe it's not obvious, then you run into maybe like funding issues or
it's the issue with like giving the masses the power, They're subject to all of these biases that plague everyone,
And it'll likely lead to a wrong decision because of that, and that makes me very sad. Well, studies of injury or death rates as a result of error, and virtually all incident reviews procedures used in healthcare today fail to control for hindsight bias. So basically, it would be the idea that for like the morbidity and mortality conferences, people would say, "Of course, you should have known this."
I see.
You're a doctor. It was obvious now. We've got all this data in front of us.
Yeah.
This is clearly your fault because you've messed up here.
I see.
So that would be what they're studying with the injury and death rates. So you'd see that people would be predisposed to accepting that, of course, this would be the right plan of action because, So that happens all the time in healthcare, and apparently physicians who are primed with a possible diagnosis before evaluating the symptoms, they are much more likely to arrive at the primed diagnosis than the physicians who are only given the symptoms. Even if the likelihood was the same. So you run into hindsight bias there as well, or maybe some form of confirmation bias, I suppose. But kind of an issue for healthcare, especially since you're dealing with such visceral topics. In the justice system, hindsight bias results in defendants being judged as being capable of preventing the bad outcome. So if you're a defendant, then people will expect, once they see all the things, oh, you should have known this would have happened, right?
I see.
You should have taken better precautions, and of course you could have maybe, but it's not something. They tend to be judged harsher on unrealistic expectations of oh, you should have known this.
They don't take the context into consideration.
Yeah, hindsight is 20/20. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there was also a weaker effect that also affects the plaintiffs because there's an assumption of risk. When there's an assumption of risk, so like if a person goes skydiving and the skydiving company messed up,
I see.
They didn't do something properly, they'll be like, well, you did go skydiving. There's an expectation, even if the skydiving company did something wrong, people will be less likely. Anyway, let's head to the game section.
All right, welcome to our game section. But before we do any fun stuff, we'd like to talk about next season. Seeing as this is our last episode of this season, season 2, we're going to have a bit of a planned break between season 2 and 3. We'll be back on December 23rd.
Yes, okay.
But we have some announcements, right?
So first off, we're going to be adding a third host. Not replacing Keegan as you all thought.
And we've seen her before.
Yes, Alyssa Chenery, which was on some episodes before. Do you know which ones?
The Apocalypse.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, because of our desire to increase the production value of the show, we're going to be going to a bi-weekly schedule. So we're going to have much more comprehensive shows and hopefully better produced shows. We're upgrading. Some of us are upgrading our gear. We're going to have a new host. It's going to be a great time, isn't it?
Yeah. And we are toying with some ideas about, making more themes, running through our seasons. So we'll see what happens.
Yes. Okay. So now that we've got that out of the way, I'd like to give you a quiz.
Last quiz of season 2.
Yes, in the spirit of intuition, I decided that I would do a adventure quiz. I'm calling
so
it
I have
Choose Your
to
Own Trivia.
Intuit my way through your quiz.
So the way this is going to work is, so there's 7 levels of questions.
Okay.
Per level, there's 2 questions. You get to pick the category that you want to answer to make your way through the quiz. So I'm going to give you 2 main headlines of the category, like Jeopardy. You know?
Okay.
And then you get to pick. So so some of these are a little bit more easy and some of them are difficult. The point here is, if you get the question right, you get to pick the category. If you get the question wrong, I get to pick the category.
Oh, geez.
All right, so this quiz is out of 7. There's no half marks.
Okay.
Maybe. Well, so, first question. This is the only one where there's not a choice. What is the name of the official national anthem of the United States?
Oh, geez. Okay. Hang on.
Come on.
Like Star Spangled Banner?
Yes, it is.
All right.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So then now you get to choose between 2 topics: classic literature and classic Christian apologetics.
Oh, classic Christian apologetics.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know, apologetics are basically like people trying to create arguments for the existence of God. Keegan's quite well versed in this, so hopefully he gets this.
I'm well versed because I'm good at arguing against them.
Yes, exactly. Just to be clear of his position.
Yes.
So I picked an Achilles heel here. What is one premise or conclusion of the Christological argument? The one he's never known. You can be vague.
Okay, premise or conclusion of the Christological argument.
There are 2 premises and 1 conclusion. You can get this without knowing anything about Christological argument.
Okay. All right, well, I'm going to go with therefore God exists.
Yeah, you got it. That was the out. Yeah. So the idea is, premise 1 is the character and wisdom of Jesus is such that his views about reality are correct. And premise 2, one of Jesus' views about reality was that God exists. So it's a circular argument, which is why it's flawed. But God is real, therefore God is real, because Jesus is God. Anyway, regardless. So now you get to pick.
Okay, what are my options?
Do you want to do ocean geography or rainforest geography?
Oh, crap. Geography, my other Achilles heel. I'll go with...
Little known fact about Keegan, he was born with 1,000 Achilles heels.
Ocean geography or rainforest geography? All right, I'll go with rainforest.
Good pick. The other one was harder. All right, so nearly 3/4 of the Amazon rainforest is in Brazil, and what other country? So combined, this is nearly 3/4. Brazil contains 60% of the
so
Amazon
bad
rainforest.
at geography.
Just think South America. Come on, this is easy.
What's near Brazil?
You've got 10 seconds. Oh, it's timed quiz, by the way. 5 seconds.
Colombia.
No, it's Peru with 13%. Sorry, I get to pick this. So here's the here are the 2 categories.
Okay.
Famous scientists and famous science.
I can't lose.
All right, so I'm going to pick the harder one then, if you're so sure. In 1876, a young Austrian student dissected hundreds of eels in search of the male sex organs.
Oh.
Conceding failure, he turns to other issues in frustration. Who is it?
What were the issues he turned to?
They were related. He lived from 1856 to 1939, if that helps.
No, it doesn't.
Okay. His greatest works are not in that field, by the way.
Are not in the field of eel genitalia?
No.
Well, can you tell me what they are in?
No, you'll know it right away. You gonna give up? Are you
related, though. It's related?
I'm gonna give you a couple more seconds, so you better pick a scientist.
Einstein.
No, No, of course not.
No, I know it's not.
Sigmund Freud.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah. Sigmund Freud, right? He was one of the most famous psychologists because he was basically the guy who invented it. Basically, not he didn't. Yeah.
Oh, that hurts.
Oh, I'm sorry. So you've gotten 2 wrong so far. So let's see. Business outsider or trademark terminology? I'm going to go with business outsider for you.
I don't even know what that is.
So in June of 2012, Coca-Cola announced plans to commence operations in Burma and Myanmar after a gap of 60 years, leaving what 2 countries as the only places where it is not do business? 2 countries.
Okay.
Where does Coca-Cola not get to?
2 countries where Coca-Cola is not. Can you give me a vague geographical region?
No, but I will give you a hint because you're terrible at business.
Yes. And geography, so.
And geography. These 2 places, the U.S. does not generally get along with very well.
Okay. Cuba and China?
No, sorry. Okay, so it's actually Cuba and North Korea.
Oh.
So I would give you half points, but I called no half points east.
Damn.
So
North
2 more
Korea.
questions right. You can almost pass.
Okay.
Okay, so the 2 are... I will let you pick the last one no matter what, but I'm going to pick propaganda and rhetoric for this
What
one.
was the other one? What was the other option?
Biblical science.
Oh,
Which mostly has to do with science. So propaganda and rhetoric. Due to anti-German sentiment during World War I, what food item was called Liberty cabbage in the U.S.?
Oh, jeez. I'm guessing it was a German word.
No doubt.
That sounds like liberty.
I can't say.
Was it like Lieber cabbage?
You're going with Lieber cabbage? Is that your final answer?
No. Am I close?
It's... No, you're not close.
Does it sound similar?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to give you 5 seconds.
Okay, wait.
All right, time's up. Give me your answer.
Lieber cabbage. I got
no,
nothing.
it's sauerkraut.
Oh.
Sauerkraut. Liberty cabbage. Akin to the Freedom Fries of 2003.
Oh, man, I can't believe I missed that. That's so...
Yeah.
Hindsight bias.
Yeah.
So obvious.
It was so obvious. Okay, you get to pick this one because I'm being nice. Okay, you get the choice between universal decay and universal proportions.
Ooh. All right. Proportions.
After hydrogen and helium, what is expected to be the most abundant element in the universe?
Lithium.
That's what everybody says. It's not lithium.
Really?
Sorry. No, it's not. Because
Wait.
You want to take a second stab at this?
Yes.
All
Okay.
right.
So, is it based on Big Bang? What should be present after the Big Bang?
What should be present now?
Present now. Okay. Different story.
Which is why everybody messes that one up.
Okay.
Everybody's just going down the periodic table. That's not how it goes.
But lithium was third most present at Big Bang. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So we're talking like... And it's atom?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, man. I wish I had a periodic table. I want to say nickel. I don't think it's right.
It's not
right.
nickel. It's oxygen.
Oh, really?
Yeah, sorry. It was a really medium element, I know. It's kind of hard when they're medium.
That was a fun quiz, though.
Yeah, we should do something more like that again.
Maybe
Yeah.
with Alyssa next to.
Yes.
Can you finagle up a 2-person version of that quiz?
Yeah, I think I could manage that. So
Sounds good.
Guess that's everything then.
Yeah. Subscribe to us on YouTube, iTunes, or the podcast feed of your choice. Also, be sure to like or rate us depending on your platform. Thanks for listening to Mind the Gap, and we'll see you on December 23rd.
I have a bad feeling about this.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
Oh, I have a bad feeling about this.
very bad feeling about this.
I got a bad feeling about this.
I have a bad feeling about this.
I have a bad feeling about this.
I have a really bad feeling about this.